Now, as most of you probably know, the final trailer for the Rise of Skywalker will be dropping tonight, or will have already dropped by the time some of you watch this. And before it, not only has J.J. Abrams had a lot to say about what this movie will be, which I'll talk about in a bit, but rumors are once again swirling about problems this movie is facing behind the scenes. That reshoots are still in progress, there's multiple different endings they're trying to pick from, none of which seem to be resonating with the test audiences, and that Abrams was apparently told by Disney to make a movie that all fans will love after The Last Jedi split the fanbase. And before I get into everything here, let me just say that I don't personally have any super secret sources or anything like that. Now sure, I get quite a few emails from people who claim to be in the know, and may very well be, I suppose, or they could just as easily be someone trying to mess with me who wants to see false information spread for whatever reason. So a lot of what I'm talking about here was put out there by others who, I'd like to assume, feel pretty confident about their sources if they're willing to report on it. That said, take everything here with a grain of salt. That said, let's start by looking at some of these rumors and discussing how likely they are to be true and what it means if they are. Like the one that says that Disney, behind closed doors, was upset with The Last Jedi and how it split the fanbase, and potentially cost them a ton of money down the road since it drove away fans from the franchise that they were obviously hoping would be in it for the long haul. So going into this final movie, they basically told J.J. Abrams to fix the fan base with Episode 9, and to make a movie that all fans could or would enjoy. And this, I'd say, is quite likely, that J.J. Abrams was given a very clear directive with this movie to make a film that wouldn't be controversial and split the fan base even further, to make one that hopefully could begin to do the opposite, that it could start to heal the fan base. And this is actually something I've been saying for quite some time now, that J.J. Abrams is going to try, and I stress try, to make the best damn Star Wars movie he can for the fans, because Disney knows damn well that they have some problems right now with the franchise, even if they don't want to say as much. When Bob Iger, the CEO of Disney, said last year after Solo failed at the box office that a slowdown of Star Wars movies was coming, that was about the closest thing to an admission of defeat that we'll ever get. But that's exactly what it was. Because you can't tell me that they, meaning Disney, didn't buy Star Wars with the intent of cranking out at least one movie a year. And as I've also said before, though sure, businesses don't often like to come out and just admit defeat or when they've made mistakes, another big factor on why no one at Lucasfilm or Disney will say that, maybe The Last Jedi did some harm to the fanbase, is that to do so, to in any way sympathize or even just recognize the so-called haters, would see them, Disney and Lucasfilm, get roasted on social media and by the mainstream media for caving into the toxic side of the fanbase. For example, just look at what happened when Rose Tico was apparently removed from some Episode 9 merchandise. There were some who immediately cried there was a conspiracy to erase the character, that they were giving in to the trolls who had attacked the actress Kelly Marie Tran on Twitter, that Disney and Lucasfilm were being sexist and racist, which was a little humorous and ironic to those who think the sequel trilogy has been little more than an exercise in forced diversity. And not to get too deeply into all this now, but I think it's absolutely absurd to say that there was a secret motive or agenda for removing Rose from that merchandise. It could be anything from her not being in the movie all that much, to what was pretty much claimed, that they hadn't got final artwork in time to include her, to the fact that, I'm sorry to say, but Rose Tico merchandise didn't seem to sell all that well. And if anyone out there thinks it's a plot to destroy Rose, maybe you should just post your pictures of all the Rose Tico merchandise you've purchased to begin to prove otherwise. Either way, my point was that it's so easy nowadays to cast a negative light on someone or something, even for doing nothing wrong per se, or doing something minor that just gets blown out of proportion. So Disney in any way recognizing the haters or issuing something even remotely resembling an apology to them would have been blown way out of proportion and probably been seen as nothing short of a hate crime. And I'm kidding, I think. Anyway, getting back on point here, yes, Disney probably said to J.J. Abrams that they wanted to make sure he made a movie that would appeal to all fans, which actually seems like a really odd thing to tell him, because what else was he going to try and do with this movie? I mean, you of course don't want to do just straight up fan service with the film, and I think there is a very, very fine line between doing fan service and doing something that all fans will enjoy and appreciate that isn't considered fan service. But either way, you obviously want to make a movie for the fans or the customers. You want to make a movie that as many of them as possible will end up enjoying. I'm sure a lot of us have seen interviews where Robert Downey Jr., who of course played Iron Man in the MCU, talks about how really the movies are for the fans, that they're always thinking about them, and you could argue it's because of this approach that Avengers Endgame is now the highest grossing movie of all time. So why would they have to tell J.J. Abrams to make a movie for the fans? I wonder why they'd feel this needed to be said, or who'd ever make a Star Wars movie that didn't do this.
I would be worried if everybody across the board was like, yeah, that was a good movie. It's much more exciting to me when you get, a group of people who are like coming up to you and really, really excited about it, and you know it's going to be something that they're having their DVD collection and watch over and the way that I got into Miller's Crossing, maybe, I don't know, but and then there are other people who walk out literally saying that was the worst movie I've ever seen. Having those two extremes to me is the mark of the type of movie that I want to make. So.
Oh, well, that's probably why they had to tell J.J. Abrams to make a movie for the fans, since the last guy up in the sequel trilogy didn't like to make that type of movie, and hence the last time Rian Johnson was asked about his Star Wars trilogy, the one he was promised to be getting before The Last Jedi even came out, he finally started to say, if it happens. And let's be real here, I think we all know it's not an if at this point, that it's never going to happen. If Disney and Lucasfilm truly want to heal the fan base, you don't bring back the guy who broke it. It's that simple. Okay, and moving on here, there are reports that Episode 9 is still doing reshoots, and that they currently have multiple different edits of the film, and are trying to pick from something like a half dozen different endings, none of which are apparently appealing or resonating with test audiences. Now, do I think this is true? Well, quite possibly, though I'd be stunned if the reshoots are as extensive as some are saying. I mean, there's less than 2 months to go at this point. If huge chunks of the film are being reshot right now, I don't know if it's humanly possible to have it finished in time, at least not in a truly polished form, which Disney would no doubt expect or even demand. That said, and do keep in mind I am someone who hopes they can pull off at least a good movie with Episode 9. If this is all true, if the movie is getting massive reshoots at this point and there are multiple cuts with multiple different endings that they can't pick from, then this is about the worst possible news I can imagine. Because it just confirms what so many fear about these Star Wars movies, or the sequel trilogy. That they don't have a solid story in mind for the movie, and didn't have one for the trilogy, and they're just trying to patch something together to end it, instead of truly finishing what George Lucas once started. Because now as we look back, and after all we've learned over the years, it seems like they were far more worried about how they were going to start this thing than they were worried about sticking the eventual landing. Not realizing that if you don't land on your feet after whatever trick you're trying to pull off in the air, you're going to have major points deducted, if not have the attempt all but disqualified. And personally, though I certainly hoped for and expected big things out of Episode 7 going into it, I would have been, and was, far more forgiving if they didn't get that movie just right, as long as what followed it up was good and what capped off the whole trilogy was fantastic, and that it all really added something to the overall story when all was said and done. That's been the whole key all along that they didn't even apparently know they should be looking for. So hearing that they're trying to figure out what to do with the end of the Skywalker saga, after the once perfect ending we got in Return of the Jedi, well, it just makes me sad. However, some of J.J. Abrams' more recent quotes are trying to assure us otherwise, that everything is fine and the situation is normal, and that Episode 9 is going to be fantastic. Though honestly, I don't really know what else he'd be saying at this point. If it is a mess behind the scenes, I highly doubt he'd be screaming that from the rooftops or anything. Though at the same time, for all we know, everything might be okay. None of this talk about reshoots and multiple endings has been confirmed, though again, I highly doubt Disney and Lucasfilm would go out of their way to mention these things. Anyway, here are some things JJ said in a recent interview, and though they're taken out of context a bit, I think you can certainly understand the gist. This is about bringing this thing to a close in a way that is emotional and meaningful, and also satisfying in terms of actually answering as many questions as possible. So if years from now someone's watching these movies, all 9 of them, they're watching a story that is as cohesive as possible. While there were many things that were planned and discussed, George Lucas himself said when he created this that he saw it as 3 3-act plays. That doesn't mean there aren't things that come up that make you realize, oh, here's an opportunity. It also doesn't mean that there's a list of payoffs that we have to do because of setups, but we also were very much aware that this is the end of the trilogy and it needs to be satisfying. We went into this knowing it has to be an ending. We're not screwing around. Now, here's the thing about all these comments. Even if they are just covering up huge problems behind the scenes, they sound great. They sound like the right things to say and what fans should want to hear right now. However, I wish they'd been what was being said about this trilogy from the very start. Instead, when it did begin, so much focus was put on the new characters and this being their story now, which is fine to an extent. I certainly understand they wanted new characters and to bring in new generations, both in terms of new generations within the actual story and outside of it within the fan base. And trying to put a positive spin on this, it really goes to show that they're acknowledging, at least here at the end, that they missed the mark with the sequel trilogy and what it should have been about at its core, which was a sequel to the previous two trilogies, the next part of one big cohesive story. Instead, this has been an odd mix of retelling and tearing down of the old. And now they have to try and not only put things back together again, but also give us a solid finish. Which is why I do think there is some truth to these reshoots and multiple ending rumors, because it's very hard to put all this back together again and give us a solid ending with just one movie. Well, that's all I've got for you this time. Now it's your turn to tell me what you think about these reports. Is there any truth to them or not? Whatever the case may be, leave a comment below and let's talk some Star Wars. And until next time, thanks for watching.